Stop scrolling right now, because I'm about to tell you something that will change the way you see your entire life. If you've ever been in a relationship with a narcissist, if you felt like your soul was slowly being drained, if you've questioned your sanity, begged for crumbs of love, or lost yourself trying to fix someone who only saw you as supply, then you need to hear this. And not just for closure, for clarity, for purpose, for power. You didn't end up in that toxic relationship by accident. That wasn't random. That wasn't just bad luck. You were placed in that relationship for a reason. And no, not to be punished. Not because you're broken, and definitely not because you're weak. You were placed there because you were meant to wake up. Because the strongest version of you could only be born in the fire, in the pain you went through, the confusion, the gaslighting. That was your initiation. Listen, I know what it's like to feel like you lost years of your life. I know what it's like to shrink yourself to avoid conflict. I know the emotional exhaustion of trying to love someone who only loves control. But what if I told you that buried inside all of that pain is the real reason you were placed in that narcissist's life? And even more importantly, the reason they were placed in you. If you watch this speech until the end, I promise you're going to walk away with a truth so powerful, it will not only help you make sense of your past, it will help you take command of your future. You'll finally understand why it happened, why it had to happen, and most importantly, who you were always meant to become because of it. You were not destroyed. You were being rebuilt. And by the end of this, you're going to feel that deep in your bones. Let's go. You weren't chosen by accident. Let me say that again, because you need to hear it with every fiber of your being. You were not chosen by accident. That relationship with the narcissist, the one that left you questioning your reality, your worth, and your sanity, was not some random cruel twist of fate. It was part of a much deeper design, a confrontation that had to happen to wake something up inside of you that had been asleep for far too long. And I know how it feels, because when you're in the thick of it, it doesn't feel like anything spiritual or meaningful. It feels like you're trapped in an emotional prison, built brick by brick from manipulation, gaslighting, lies, and control. You start to think you're the problem. You replay conversations in your head, wondering if you overreacted. You apologize for things you didn't do just to keep the peace. You begin shrinking, doubting, and disappearing from your own life. But here's what they don't want you to realize, what most people never realize until it's too late, that narcissist was never in control. The moment they entered your life, the universe, God, or whatever force you believe in, set a deeper truth in motion, a truth that says you are going to learn just how powerful you actually are, because you can't learn strength and comfort. You can't build boundaries without first being pushed past your limits. You can't understand your value without being put in a situation where it's constantly questioned, where you are forced to fight for it. That narcissists didn't appear to destroy you. They appeared to challenge you, to shake you out of old beliefs, to push you out of that small version of yourself that was willing to settle, to please, to stay silent. And the pain, the confusion, the chaos, that was your soul screaming for your attention. That was life, throwing a brick through the window of your normal, demanding that you wake up. And I get it. It hurts. You probably spent nights crying yourself to sleep, wondering what you did wrong. You probably begged for their approval, adjusted your behavior, silenced your needs, hoping that maybe this time they'd love you the way you needed. But they never did. And here's why. Because it was never about them loving you. It was always about you finally learning how to love yourself. That's the truth. The narcissist was just the lesson. You were the assignment. You were the one life was trying to reach. You were the one with the bigger purpose, the deeper calling, the hidden strength. And that's why you were chosen. You see, narcissists don't pick weak people. They pick the bright ones, the warm ones, the empathetic ones, the ones with something they want to drain: energy, attention, validation, identity. And in their twisted way, they reveal to you the very parts of yourself that you forgot you had. When they walk out, when the mask slips, when the illusion finally crumbles, what's left? You raw, broken, maybe, but real, awake, capable of rebuilding from a place of truth. You weren't placed in their life to be ruined. You were placed in their life so you could remember who you are, so that you could rise. And if you're still standing right now, even if you're hurting, then it worked. You were never a victim of that story. You were the hero in the making. The narcissist was a mirror, and that's the part that most people miss. See, when we think of mirrors, we think of clarity, of seeing ourselves. But what if I told you the mirror doesn't always show us what we want to see? What if the person who made you feel the smallest, the most confused, the most rejected was actually showing you the parts of yourself that were already hurting? Think about that for a second. When someone ignores you, belittles you, manipulates you, why does it cut so deep? Why does it light up every insecurity like a fire? It's because the narcissist didn't invent those wounds. They just exploited what was already there. And that's what makes them a mirror. Not because they reflect your best, but because they reflect what's broken and waiting to be healed. And I know that's a hard truth to swallow. It's so much easier to point the finger and say, they're toxic, they're the villain, they destroyed me. But let's get brutally honest. Why did you stay? Why did you keep trying to fix them? Why did you believe their version of you instead of your own? That's the mirror. That's the part no one wants to face. Because when you stand in front of that kind of mirror, you don't just see them. You see the places where you've been ignoring yourself for years. The little girl or boy who never felt good enough. The adult who learned to settle because somewhere along the way you thought love had to be earned. That's what the narcissist pulls out of you. Not because they're some divine teacher. No, most of the time, they're just operating from their own unhealed chaos. But because their behavior forces you to confront yourself. Every time they gaslighted you and you started questioning your memory, your emotions, your intuition, it was life telling you, start trusting yourself again. Every time they withheld affection, attention, or approval, it was life saying, you need to stop seeking validation from people who can't give it. Every time they devalued you and made you feel invisible, it was life screaming, you were never meant to make yourself small just to be loved. That's what mirrors do. They show you everything. And yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, it's painful, but it's also the most powerful thing that could ever happen to you. Because once you see it, once you finally recognize that you've been projecting your worth onto someone else's behavior, you can take your power back. You can stop waiting for them to change, to apologize, to recognize your value. And instead you start doing the work. You start healing the part of you that believed you weren't enough. You start setting boundaries, not just to protect yourself from others, but to honor the truth of who you are. And guess what? That changes everything. Because when you change, the mirror changes. You stop attracting chaos. You stop chasing people who make you prove your worth. You stop abandoning yourself. The narcissist didn't give you that power. They just revealed the places where you'd given it away. And once you see that, once you understand that every painful moment was showing you something about yourself, you can use it not to hate yourself, not to blame yourself, but to grow, to evolve, to finally come home to who you are without needing anyone else to validate it. 3. You were meant to wake up. That relationship that tore you apart, the one that left you questioning everything. It wasn't meant to comfort you. It was meant to crack you wide open. And I know that sounds harsh, but listen to me. Growth never happens inside the comfort zone. It happens in the breakdown. It happens when everything you thought was real suddenly falls apart and you're left staring at the pieces, wondering who you even are anymore. That's when the waking up begins. Because up until that point, you were asleep to the truth. You were asleep to your own worth. You were asleep to the reality that you were sacrificing your identity just to keep someone else happy. You were asleep to the fact that love should never cost you your peace, but it did. Over and over again. You gave them everything, your energy, your time, your trust, and what did they give you back? Confusion, silence, manipulation, just enough affection to keep you hoping, but never enough to actually make you feel secure. That's not love, that's a lie. And deep down you knew it. That's the part that hurts the most, isn't it? The part of you that knew something was wrong, that felt the pit in your stomach, the tension in your chest, the voice in your gut whispering, this isn't right, but you didn't listen because you were taught to doubt yourself. Because maybe you thought love meant loyalty no matter how much it hurt. Because you wanted to believe that if you just loved harder, tried more, stayed longer, they'd finally see you. But they didn't, and they never would. Because narcissists don't want connection, they want control. And the more you gave, the more they took, until there was almost nothing left of you. But then something happened. Maybe it was a final betrayal. Maybe it was a quiet moment where you couldn't even recognize the person staring back at you in the mirror. Whatever it was, it snapped you away. And I want you to hear this loud and clear. That moment wasn't the end of you. It was the beginning of a new level of awareness, the beginning of learning how to trust yourself again, the beginning of building boundaries that don't bend, the beginning of putting yourself first, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. That pain wasn't punishment. It was an alarm clock, one you couldn't ignore anymore. And yes, waking up hurt. When you realize how long you tolerated the bare minimum, when you look back at all the times you betrayed yourself just to be accepted, it stings, but it also liberates you, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you understand the role you played, not in causing the abuse, but in abandoning yourself to avoid it, you take your power back. You start making decisions based on truth, not fear. You start recognizing red flags and actually walking away from them instead of trying to paint them white. You stop asking for permission to exist. You stop chasing people who can't love you. You stop sleeping on your own damn worth. And here's what's even more powerful. Once you wake up, you become unshakable. Not because you're never afraid again, but because you finally trust yourself to walk away when things no longer serve you. You trust yourself to speak up when something doesn't feel right. You trust yourself to say enough. That's what this was all about. Not the relationship, not the narcissist, but you waking up to who you are, what you deserve, and how unstoppable you are when you finally stop settling for less. You were being prepared for power and you didn't even know it. Every moment you spent in that toxic relationship, every time you felt like you were breaking, every time you questioned your sanity, it wasn't just suffering, it was shaping. It was training. It was life forcing you into a version of yourself that couldn't be built any other way. And I know that's hard to hear because let's be honest, you didn't ask for this. You didn't ask to fall in love with someone who weaponized your kindness. You didn't ask to walk on eggshells every day, trying to avoid another emotional explosion. You didn't ask to lose yourself in a relationship that drained your spirit, but you also didn't fold. You're still here. And if you're still here, it means you've already begun the transformation. See, real power doesn't come from getting everything right. It doesn't come from avoiding pain. It comes from walking through the fire and realizing you didn't burn. It comes from surviving what was meant to destroy you and using the ashes to rebuild something unshakable. That narcissist wasn't just a nightmare. They were an initiation. They were the pressure that forged the steel in your spine, the storm that taught you how to stand, the chaos that pushed you to define your own peace. And you needed that. As much as it hurts, you needed to be challenged. You needed something to crack the shell of who you were pretending to be, so the real you could finally step out. Because the truth is, you were playing small. You were staying quiet. You were ignoring your own intuition because you were afraid of losing love. Afraid of conflict, afraid of being alone. But life said no more. You weren't just meant to survive. You were meant to lead. You were meant to show others what it looks like to heal out loud. You were meant to take your pain and turn it into purpose. And guess what? You can't lead anyone if you haven't faced your own darkness. You can't inspire anyone if you've never had to rebuild from rock bottom. You were being prepared to become the kind of person that can walk into any room and not need approval. The kind of person who doesn't tolerate being treated like an afterthought. The kind of person who speaks up, sets standards, and refuses to apologize for who they are. That kind of power isn't born in happy endings. It's born in hard beginnings, in the messy, complicated, raw places where you have to choose yourself even when it feels impossible. It's born in the moment you finally say, I'm done abandoning myself just to keep someone else comfortable. That power, it's in you. It always was. But sometimes it takes losing everything to finally see what you've been carrying all along. And I know that sounds backward. I know it feels unfair. But when you stop resisting the lesson and start claiming the strength, everything shifts. You stop feeling like a victim of your story and start owning it. You were never weak for falling for them. You were human. You were never broken for staying too long. You were hopeful. But now you're becoming powerful, not because they changed you, but because they revealed the parts of you that were waiting to rise. And that's the fifth hidden in the pain. You didn't just to survive that relationship. You stepped into the version of yourself that was always meant to emerge. You were called to break a pattern, not just to survive a relationship, but to shatter a generational cycle that has been running your life in the background for far too long. This wasn't just about one narcissist. This was about every silent dinner you watched growing up, every toxic dynamic you thought was normal, every message you absorbed that told you love had to hurt or that your needs were too much. That relationship didn't just trigger you. It traced a line straight back through your past, through your upbringing, through the family roles you were taught to play. The caretaker, the peacemaker, the fixer, the one who swallows their truth to keep the peace, the one who learns to earn love instead of expect it. And suddenly you find yourself in a relationship that feels familiar, not because it's healthy, but because it matches the dysfunction you've known all your life. And here's the truth: that pattern would have kept going unless someone stopped it, unless someone looked at the chaos and said, this ends with me, and that someone is you. You were placed in that relationship not because you were weak or naive, but because you were the one strong enough to disrupt the cycle. You were the one with enough awareness to question what everyone else ignored. You were the one who had the courage to stop pretending it was okay. You were the one who saw through the manipulation, even when it was dressed up as love. And yes, it hurt like hell. Yes, it broke your heart. Yes, it made you doubt everything. But underneath all that pain was your power waking up. Because once you start to see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Once you realize that you've been reenacting the same emotional scripts over and over again, choosing people who mirror the very wounds you've been trying to heal, you begin to understand just how deep this runs. You didn't just end up with a narcissist. You were drawn to what felt familiar. And that's not your fault. That's what the brain does. It pulls us toward what it knows, even if what it knows is pain. But now you know better. And when you know better, you can do better. You can choose differently. You can unlearn. You can rewire. You can say no. You can walk away. You can stand up and say, I will not pass this down to anyone else. I will not teach my kids, my friends, my younger self that this is what love looks like. And let me tell you something. Breaking a pattern is not easy. It will shake your identity. It will isolate you. People won't understand why you're suddenly drawing lines, why you're saying no, why you're walking away from what used to be normal. But you weren't born to please people. You were born to change the story. And when you do that, when you interrupt the generational echo of abuse, silence, codependency, or self-abandonment, you don't just heal yourself. You create a ripple that heals everything forward and backward. You send a message that says no more, not in my life, not in my lineage, not in my future. So if it feels heavy right now, if it feels like you're carrying something bigger than just one bad relationship, it's because you are, but you can handle it. You were chosen for this moment because you're strong enough to rewrite the story. And the most powerful part, once you break the pattern, you don't just set yourself free, you give everyone else permission to do the same. Your healing will become someone else's survival guide. You might not see it now. Maybe all you feel is the weight of what you've been through, the betrayal, the confusion, the slow unraveling of everything you thought was love. And right now, you might be wondering why it had to happen to you, why you had to be the one to feel used, discarded, unseen. But let me tell you something that will shift your entire perspective. What you're going through has a purpose far bigger than just your own life. Because when you rise from this, when you take all the pain and turn it into wisdom, you will become the light for someone who's still trapped in the dark. There is someone out there right now, someone who is questioning their reality, doubting their worth, wondering if they're crazy because a narcissist has them wrapped in emotional confusion, and they're going to need your story. They're going to need your voice, your courage, your example, not because you were perfect, but because you were real. Because you've been in the pit and you made it out. And when you speak your truth, you give them permission to speak theirs. You make healing contagious. You make leaving okay. You make standing up for yourself not just possible, but necessary. That's the power of healing out loud, of refusing to stay silent just because society tells you to move on or let it go. No, you don't need to move on. You need to move through. And as you move through, every step becomes a map for someone else. Every time you set a boundary, every time you choose self-respect over familiar chaos, every time you say, this is not love, you become the living proof that it's possible to rebuild and that matters. It matters more than you know. Because you're not just breaking your own chains, you're breaking the illusion for everyone watching, your friends, your kids, your community. They see you. They see the transformation, and it starts to plant a seed. If they can do it, maybe I can too. Now, that's what legacy looks like. Not just what you leave behind, but how you lead right now, even in the mess, even when your voice shakes, even when the old version of you wants to crawl back to comfort. You keep going, you keep rising because you understand that your healing is not selfish, it's service. And listen, I'm not saying you need to be perfect to help someone. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to be honest, vulnerable, real. You just need to tell your story without shame, because shame dies when it's spoken, and so does silence. The silence that kept you in that relationship. The silence that made you question yourself. The silence that said, don't rock the boat, no more. You rocking the boat might be the very thing that saves someone else from drowning. Your strength might be the exact thing they needed to witness to finally walk away. Your journey becomes the manual they never had. So when you feel like it was all for nothing, remember this. Your healing is bigger than you. Your courage echoes. Your growth inspires. You're not just surviving a narcissist. You're becoming the kind of person who transforms pain into purpose, wounds into wisdom, and experience into empowerment. And that is exactly how the cycle ends and a new story begins. So here's the truth. The truth no one told you, but that you damn well deserve to hear. You were never a victim. You were a catalyst. That narcissist wasn't sent to destroy you. They were sent to reveal you, to wake you up, to break the patterns you didn't even know you were repeating. You weren't placed in their life to save them. You were placed there to save yourself, to see what you'd been tolerating, to feel what no longer serves you, and to finally say, no more. Because look at you now, still standing, still healing, still rising. Every tear, every sleepless night, every time you thought, I can't do this, you did. And now you carry a power they'll never understand, a clarity they can't manipulate, a voice they can't silence. You are no longer playing small. You are no longer begging for love. You already deserve. You broke the cycle. You rewrote the story. You came home to yourself. And if you take one thing with you from this entire message, let it be this. What nearly broke you, built you. You were chosen for this path because you're the one strong enough to lead others out of it. Your healing isn't just for you. It's for everyone who still thinks they're alone in the chaos. They're not, because you've been there. And now you're the proof that freedom is possible. So stand tall, speak loudly, set your boundaries like steel. Because the next time a narcissist crosses your path, they won't find the version of you they met before. They'll find the warrior they helped create. And that's the full circle moment they'll never be ready for, but you were born for. Speech over truth delivered. Now go live it.